The battlefield in space was never quiet, even when the guns fell silent, even when the ships stopped firing. The void carried echoes, the sharp smell of burned metal, the faint hiss of cooling hulls, the thrum of damaged engines struggling to stay alive. Captain John Hale had seen many battles in his years of service, but none carved a wound in him as deep as the one where he lost Carthar. Carthar of the Threx was not just another alien ally. He was John's closest friend, a partner who had stood with him through more fire and blood than most men could survive. When the two had first met, John remembered staring up at the towering warrior, his scales glinting like armor forged in some ancient forge. At first, John had thought the Threx cold, distant, maybe even arrogant. But the truth was different. Behind the massive frame and burning ember eyes was a soul that laughed louder, fought harder, and cared deeper than almost anyone John had ever met. Carthar had saved him more times than John could count. In the choking dust of ruined colonies, it was Carthar who hauled him back to cover when shrapnel tore through his leg. In the black corridors of derelict Dominion cruisers, it was Carthar's booming laugh that echoed through the dark, steadying John's nerves. "Human," Carthar would always say in that gravel-deep voice. "You are small, but you are stubborn. I like that." It became their shared joke, their bond, their way of saying, "I've got your back." That bond ended in fire. The Dominion ambush came without warning. Plasma bolts ripped through the Allied fleet, shredding ships before crews even had a chance to react. John's vessel, the Resolute, shuddered under the first barrage, alarms wailing through the decks. Smoke poured from ruptured panels and men screamed in confusion. John had barely strapped into his command chair when the enemy boarded. Carthar was there, as always, beside him. His massive form cut through the enemy like a living wall, claws tearing, blade flashing. John fought at his side, rifle spitting fire, both of them moving as one, two warriors who had learned each other's rhythm, each other's limits, each other's hearts. Then came the shot. John never saw where it came from. One moment Carthar was roaring in triumph, driving his blade through a Dominion soldier. The next, a searing plasma bolt slammed into his chest. The giant staggered, smoke rising from the wound. John cried out, but the battle drowned his voice. He cut down the enemy who fired, but the damage was done. Carthar fell to his knees. John dropped beside him, hands pressed desperately against the wound. His fingers slipped on hot blood, thick and dark, flowing too fast to stop. Carthar's ember eyes flickered, dimming like coals in a dying fire. Still the Threx managed to smile, weak but proud. "Do not grieve, brother," Carthar rumbled, voice already fading. "Every warrior must fall. But I fall with honor, beside you." "No," John said, his voice breaking, his heart tearing itself apart. "You're not leaving me. Not like this. But the void doesn't care about pleas. The war doesn't pause for friendship." In the chaos around them, Carthar's massive hand gripped John's arm one final time, claws gentle despite their strength. His last words were a whisper, almost drowned by the noise of the battle. "Fight on, for both of us." Then the light left his eyes. The world blurred. John sat there, stunned as the battle raged around him. He barely noticed when reinforcements drove the Dominion back. He barely felt the hands pulling him away, telling him they had to retreat. All he could see was his friend's lifeless body, a mountain of strength suddenly reduced to stillness. Later, when the fires were out and the bodies collected, John stood alone in the dim light of the med bay, staring at the covered form lying on the table. His chest felt hollow. He had lost comrades before, too many to count, but this was different. This was losing a brother. He remembered the laughter, the long talks about home, the promise they made to see the wars end together. Now one of them never would. For the first time in years, John felt tears slide down his face, and in that moment, he realized something that hurt worse than the loss itself. He had no idea how to fight without Carthar by his side. The days after Carthar's death were the hardest John had ever lived through. He had lost friends before. Soldiers fell in war, that was the rule. But this time was different. This time it felt as if something inside him had been torn out and left to bleed. The ship felt wrong without Carthar. The Resolute had always been a noisy, living place. There were the clangs of engineers in the engine room, the chatter of soldiers in the mess hall, the hum of weapons charging before battle. But Carthar's presence had been more than sound, it had been a force. His deep laugh could fill a corridor, shaking the tension out of everyone's shoulders. His huge steps echoed with confidence as if nothing in the galaxy could break him. Now that he was gone, the ship seemed quieter, emptier, almost like a tomb drifting through space. John walked the corridors and found himself expecting to see his friend around every corner. He half imagined hearing the familiar growl of Carthar's voice, teasing him the way he always did. "Human, why do you walk so slow? Are your legs that weak?" But there was only silence, and that silence cut deeper than any wound. Sleep became impossible. When John closed his eyes, he saw the moment over and over. The plasma bolt slamming into Carthar's chest, the ember eyes flickering, the last whisper of, "Fight on," for both of us. Sometimes John woke up with his hands trembling, as if he were still pressing them against his friend's wound, still trying to stop the blood. The war did not stop for grief. Orders came down from command, new missions, new battles. John carried them out because he had no choice, but his heart wasn't in it. His voice on the comms was flat. His aim was steady, but his will felt hollow. He moved like a man carrying chains, every step heavier than the last. The crew noticed. They gave him space, but their eyes followed him. Some whispered that Captain Hale was losing himself, that maybe the human who had once been so sharp, so determined, was fading. John heard them sometimes, but he didn't argue. In truth, they weren't wrong. One night, sitting alone in the mess hall, John found himself staring at Carthar's old seat. The Threx had always sat in the corner, where the ceiling was highest and the shadows deepest. He used to joke that humans made everything too small, but he stayed there anyway, close enough to talk, close enough to laugh. Now the chair stood empty, untouched, as if the whole crew was waiting for a ghost to return. John poured himself a glass of the harsh Threx liquor Carthar had once introduced him to. The taste burned like fire, but it was familiar. He raised the glass, whispering softly, "You should be here, brother. You should be the one drinking this with me." His voice cracked on the last word, and he put the glass down before it slipped from his hand. Memories haunted him in every corner of the ship. The training deck where they had sparred for hours, human speed against Threx strength. The observation lounge where Carthar once sat for an entire night, staring at the stars and telling John about the homeworld he would never see again. The med bay, where Carthar carried John after a blast wave nearly killed him. Every place was a reminder. Every reminder was a knife. And yet through the grief something else gnawed at John. A strange emptiness, but also a question. Why had Carthar trusted him so much? Why had a mighty Threx warrior born into a culture of strength and honor looked at a fragile human and called him brother? That word echoed in John's head again and again. Brother, it wasn't just a title. It was a bond. But bonds came with weight. Somewhere deep inside, John knew Carthar had left him more than memories. He had left him responsibility. Responsibility to fight on, to carry the flame, to protect others. But grief clouded John's vision. He could not yet see the path ahead. All he could feel was the silence, the hollowness, the sharp truth that half of his soul had been taken by the void. And so, day by day, John drifted like his ship through the black, moving forward, but lost all the same. Weeks passed since Carthar's death, but the weight of grief never lifted from John Hale's chest. He carried out missions, spoke his orders, fought when he had to, but the fire that once burned in him was dim. His crew followed him out of duty, but even they could feel the emptiness in their captain's eyes. It was during one of those quiet stretches, when the Resolute docked at a neutral outpost for supplies, that John's life shifted again. The docking bay was busy with traders, mechanics, and patrol guards. Ships came and went, filling the hangar with the growl of engines and the scent of fuel. John had no reason to be there, but something drew him to the observation platform, where he stood watching the endless traffic of the stars. That was when he saw the Threx shuttle. It descended slow and deliberate, its hull scarred but polished with care. The sight of it made John's chest tighten. He hadn't seen a Threx ship since Carthar's funeral rites. And the memories came flooding back, the honor chants, the fire torches, the weight of silence as his friend's body was carried into the flame. The shuttle touched down, steam hissing from its vents. The hangar crew moved to guide it, but John stayed frozen where he stood. Part of him wanted to walk away. He didn't think he had the strength to face more reminders of his fallen brother. Yet his feet refused to move. The ramp lowered with a heavy groan. From the mist of coolant a figure appeared. At first John thought his eyes deceived him, because the shape was so familiar, the tall frame, the powerful stride. For a heartbeat, he thought it was Carthar stepping down the ramp alive again. His heart pounded, hope and disbelief crashing together. But it wasn't Carthar. It was a woman. She was Threx, tall and regal, her scales shimmering with violet undertones that caught the light like starlight on water. Her face carried the same strong ridges as her brother, but her features were sharper, almost graceful. Her eyes burned like molten amber, brighter even than Carthar's. She moved with a controlled elegance, each step measured, as if the ground itself yielded to her presence. John couldn't breathe. He had never seen a Threx woman before. Few humans had. Their people guarded their families carefully, rarely letting outsiders even glimpse them. Yet here she was, striding across the hangar as if she belonged to the stars themselves. When her gaze found him, it was like a spark. She walked straight toward him, no hesitation, no pause. The crew around them stepped aside, sensing something heavy in the air. John stood tall, though his heart was racing. "I am Serath," she said at last, her voice deep and steady, yet soft with grief. "Sister of Carthar." The name hit John like a blade. His chest tightened, and for a moment he could not speak. He saw Carthar in her eyes, in the way she held herself with quiet strength. But she was not just a reminder. She was something new, familiar yet different, a living echo of the friend he had lost. John swallowed hard. "I knew your brother well. He was my closest ally." Serath inclined her head. "He told me about you, human, many times. He spoke of your courage, your loyalty, and your stubbornness. He said you were his brother." The word cracked through John's heart. Brother. Hearing it from her lips brought both comfort and pain. His eyes burned, but he forced himself to meet her gaze. "Why are you here?" he asked quietly, his voice rough. Serath reached into a pouch on her belt and drew out a crystal, faintly glowing with stored data. She held it out with both hands, the Threx gesture of deep respect. "Carthar left this," she said. "He told me if he fell it must reach you." John's hand shook as he took the crystal. It felt heavier than stone, though it was light as glass. He knew without even opening it that inside was his friend's last words, his last gift. His throat closed. Serath watched him carefully, her expression unreadable. Yet there was something in her eyes. Grief, yes, but also strength. She was not broken, even though she had lost her brother too. Instead, she carried purpose, as if Carthar's spirit burned inside her. In that moment, John realized his journey of grief was not finished. The arrival of Serath was not just a visit. It was the beginning of something greater, something his brother had planned long before his death. And for the first time in weeks, John felt the faintest flicker of light return to his soul. John held the glowing crystal in his hands as if it were made of fire. It was small, smooth, and harmless to anyone else. But to him, it felt heavier than the entire galaxy. His palms were damp, his breath uneven. Inside this crystal were the last words of the only friend he had ever called brother. Serath stood quietly before him. She did not push him to open it, nor did she try to comfort him with words. Instead, she waited, her eyes steady, her tall frame still as stone. She knew this was his moment. Finally, John whispered, almost to himself, "I need to see him. One last time." He led Serath to the private chamber near the officers' quarters. The room was small, with plain metal walls and a table in the center. He placed the crystal into the projector slot, his hands trembling. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a flicker of blue light, the hologram came alive. There he was, Carthar. The towering Threx warrior stood in front of John again, or at least the memory of him. His armor was scarred, his body weary, but his ember eyes glowed with the same warmth John remembered. When he spoke, his voice filled the room like thunder. "John," the hologram began, "if you are watching this, then I have fallen." John's chest clenched. The words were final, undeniable. He lowered his head, unable to stop the sting of tears. Carthar's image continued. Do not mourn too long, human. Death is the fate of all warriors, and I accept mine with honor. But know this. I never fought alone. I never feared the end, because I had you beside me. You, John Hale, were more than an ally. You were my brother. The word echoed. Heavy. Unshakable. John felt Sarath's gaze on him, but he couldn't look away from the figure before him. The hologram shifted slightly, Carthar raising his head as if looking straight through time. My sister Sarath now stands before you. I gave her this message because I trust her, and I trust you. If I fall, she will need someone strong at her side, someone I believe in. That someone is you. Sarath's eyes flickered with emotion, but she remained silent, letting the message unfold. Carthar's tone grew softer, almost like a father speaking to a child. Do not let grief turn your spirit hollow. The Dominion still burns worlds. The war is not yet won. Fight on, John. Fight for humanity, for the Threx, for all who cannot stand as we did. Fight for me. The hologram wavered, static rushing through his final words. Protect Sarath, protect yourself, and never forget, no matter where I walk now, you will always be my brother. Then the light faded. The room was silent again. Only the faint hum of the ship's engines filled the air. John stood frozen, staring at the empty space where his friend's image had been. His heart felt split wide open. The grief was still there, sharp and unrelenting, but now something else burned beneath it. A weight, a duty, a promise he could not ignore. He wiped his face roughly with the back of his hand, turning toward Sarath. For the first time since her arrival, he truly looked at her. The shape of her jaw, the fire in her eyes, the quiet strength in her stance. It was like staring at Carthar and yet seeing something new, something untouched by despair. He wanted me to protect you, John said hoarsely. But I think you're stronger than I am. Sarath tilted her head, her scales catching the light. Strength does not mean we do not need each other, she replied softly. My brother believed in you. So do I. The words struck deep. John realized this was not just a message of farewell. It was a bridge, from past to future, from loss to purpose. Carthar was gone, but he had left behind something greater than himself, a bond that refused to die. For a long moment, John said nothing. He simply stood there breathing, feeling the crystal's faint warmth in his palm. Then he nodded slowly, his voice quiet, but firm. All right, brother, he whispered to the empty air. I'll fight on. For both of us. Sarath placed a hand on his shoulder. Large, clawed, yet gentle. It was not the same as Carthar's, but it carried the same weight of loyalty. And for the first time since the battlefield, John felt a flicker of strength returning to his heart. The message from Carthar stayed with John like an echo that refused to fade. Every word burned itself into his memory. Fight on. Protect Sarath. Never forget. You are my brother. The weight of those words was heavier than any weapon he had carried in battle. For days afterward, John felt them pressing down on him. He had always been a soldier who followed orders, a man who fought because it was his duty. But this was different. This was personal. Carthar had trusted him with something more than war. He had trusted him with family. Sarath remained aboard the Resolute. She did not act like a guest or a stranger. She walked the corridors as if she belonged, silent yet unshakable, her presence strong enough to command respect without a single word. The crew watched her with cautious curiosity, whispering about her beauty, her grace, her piercing eyes that seemed to see through steel. To them, she was a mystery. To John, she was a constant reminder of the brother he had lost. At first, John avoided her when he could. The sight of her stirred too many feelings at once: grief, anger, guilt, and something else he could not name. But Sarath was not one to let silence linger forever. One evening she found him in the observation deck staring out at the endless black of space. You carry his voice with you, she said quietly. John didn't turn to face her. How could I not? He replied. He gave me more than I deserved. Sarath stepped closer, the faint shimmer of her scales catching the starlight. He gave because you earned it. Do not dishonor him by doubting that. Her words cut deep, not with cruelty but with truth. John clenched his fists, the guilt rising in him again. He died because I wasn't fast enough. I should have seen that shot. I should have... No, Sarath interrupted firmly, her tone carrying the weight of command. You were there. You fought beside him. That is what mattered. My brother did not fear death, he feared being forgotten. John finally turned to look at her. Her eyes glowed like molten gold, unwavering and fierce. He realized then that she carried her brother's strength within her, not his body, not his laugh, but his spirit. And it struck him that Carthar's last words had not been a burden meant to break John. They were a gift, a path forward. Still, the responsibility felt heavy. At night, when the ship fell quiet, John lay awake in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, hearing Carthar's voice in his head. Fight on, protector, for both of us. Those words demanded more than courage. They demanded everything. During training sessions, John pushed himself harder. He drilled with the soldiers until his muscles screamed, until sweat poured into his eyes. Sarath often watched, silent and watchful. Sometimes she sparred with him, her movements swift and graceful, far more refined than her brother's brute strength. She struck like lightning, precise and elegant, forcing John to dig deeper into his skills just to keep up. When their matches ended, Sarath never gloated. Instead, she would nod once, approving, as if testing whether he was truly worthy of the promise he had made. That silent approval carried more weight than any medal John had ever received. But there were softer moments, too. One night in the mess hall, when most of the crew had retired, Sarath sat across from John. She studied the cup of human coffee he handed her, sniffed it, and finally took a sip. Her eyes widened and she gave a rare smile, a small thing but bright enough to stir something warm inside John's chest. My brother said humans drink this to stay awake, she said. John gave a tired laugh. Mostly to pretend we're stronger than we are. For a moment, the silence between them was not heavy but gentle. John realized then that Sarath was not only Carthar's sister, she was her own person with her own strength, her own heart. She was not just a reminder of what he had lost, she was also a chance to build something new. Yet that truth scared him. The closer he felt to her, the heavier the weight became, because protecting her was not just a duty anymore. It was becoming a promise he wanted to keep with his whole heart. As John looked across the table at Sarath, her eyes steady and calm, he thought of Carthar's final words once more. And for the first time, he didn't just hear them as a command. He heard them as a blessing. The outpost was quiet when the Dominion came. Too quiet, the kind of silence that presses on the skin like a storm before lightning. John Hale had been uneasy all day, pacing the corridors, checking the patrol reports twice. Sarath noticed it too. Her golden eyes scanned every shadow, her body tense like a coiled spring. The first alarm cut through the air like a blade. Warning. Hostile ships detected. The red lights flared across the station, bathing the steel walls in blood-colored glow. Civilians screamed and scrambled for safety as Dominion raiders burst through the outer halls. Explosions shook the decks, and the deep hum of enemy engines filled the air like a growl. John grabbed his rifle without hesitation. His body moved on instinct, trained by years of war. But inside he felt something different this time because he wasn't fighting alone. Sarath was at his side. When the Dominion soldiers stormed the hangar, John saw her in motion for the first time. She moved like fire-made flesh, swift, fluid, deadly. Where Carthar had fought with brute force, Sarath danced between her enemies with elegance. Her twin blades flashed in arcs of silver, cutting through armor, striking with precision. Every movement was graceful yet filled with lethal intent. John fired in perfect rhythm beside her. His rifle thundered, picking off soldiers who tried to flank her. Together they were like two halves of the same storm, her blades close. His bullets far, each covering the other without needing words. At one point, a Dominion brute twice John's size broke through the line, charging with a heavy plasma hammer. John barely had time to aim before Sarath was there. She slid beneath the creature's swing, her blade driving upward into its chest, twisting hard. The brute collapsed in a heap and Sarath rose, her scales glowing faintly under the flashing alarms. She looked at John, and for the first time he saw a spark of pride in her eyes. But the fight wasn't over. The raiders pushed harder, and explosions tore through the hangar's walls. Fires roared, metal screamed, and the air filled with smoke. John coughed, sweat burning in his eyes, but he didn't falter. Sarath was there, and her presence lit something inside him, a determination that felt stronger than grief, stronger than fear. Then came the moment that tested him. A group of civilians, trapped behind fallen debris, screamed as Dominion soldiers closed in. John didn't think, he ran. His boots pounded across the deck, his rifle blazing, cutting down 2 of the enemies before they reached the civilians. But more came, too many for one man to hold back. He thought it was the end, until Sarath leapt over the burning wreckage like a shadow with wings. Her blades carved through the soldiers with terrifying speed. When the last enemy fell, she turned, extending her hand to John. He grasped it, pulling himself up, and for a second their eyes locked in the chaos. "You do not fight alone," she said firmly, her voice steady even amid the fire. Those words hit John harder than the battle itself. He realized then that Carthar's last wish was coming true. Not only was he protecting Sarath, but Sarath was protecting him too. They were equals, not guardian and ward. Partners, together they fought until the last raider fell. The silence that followed was broken only by the crackle of flames and the whimpering of the rescued civilians. John stood in the wreckage, his chest heaving, his rifle heavy in his hands. His uniform was scorched, his arms bruised, but he was alive. And so was she. Sarath wiped her blades clean and sheathed them, her shoulders rising and falling with controlled breaths. She turned to him, her expression softer now, though her eyes still burned with fire. "My brother chose well," she said quietly. "I see now why he called you brother." John swallowed hard, emotions crashing through him, grief, pride, relief, and something new that he dared not name. He looked at her standing tall in the glow of dying flames and felt a pull stronger than duty. It was purpose. It was hope. The battle was over, but something had changed forever. In the heart of chaos, John had found not just survival, but a bond stronger than war. The hangar was quiet after the battle, but it was not the same kind of quiet John Hale had felt in the weeks after Carthar's death. This silence was not empty. It was heavy with smoke, with relief, with the strange stillness that comes when survival finally sinks in. The Dominion raiders were gone. The outpost still stood, and John was alive. He leaned against the scorched wall, catching his breath. His rifle hung loosely in his hands, its barrel still hot from the fight. Around him, civilians were being guided out by the crew, their faces pale but grateful. The wounded were carried to medbays. The fires were being put out. Slowly, order returned to chaos, but John's eyes were fixed on one figure, Sarath. She stood tall among the wreckage, her blades now sheathed, her violet scales reflecting the dim glow of the emergency lights. Her breathing was steady, her posture proud, but John could see the faint marks of the battle, scratches on her armor, burns along her arms. Yet even battered, she looked unbroken, almost unshakable. For a long time, John said nothing. He only watched her, his chest tight with feelings he could not untangle. Grief still lived inside him like an old wound, but something new stirred alongside it. Hope. Sarath finally turned to him, her golden eyes meeting his. She crossed the floor with slow, deliberate steps, and when she stopped in front of him, her shadow fell across the broken tiles. "My brother was right," she said quietly. Her voice carried the strength of command, yet there was softness hidden beneath. "You fight with more than skill. You fight with heart. That is why he trusted you. That is why he called you brother." John swallowed hard, his throat dry. He had no words at first. Every memory of Carthar rushed back. The laugh, the strength, the last whisper on the battlefield. The promise. And now standing before him was the living proof of that promise. "I don't know if I deserve that trust," John admitted, his voice rough, "but I'll carry it for him. For you." Sarath studied him for a moment, her gaze sharp, searching. Then slowly she reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder. Her claws were cool against his uniform, but the weight of that gesture was warmer than anything he had felt in months. "You are not alone," she said. "Not anymore. The words cut through him like sunlight through clouds. For weeks, John had lived in the shadow of loss, believing that part of him had died with Carthar. But now, in this moment, he understood what his friend had wanted all along. The bond they shared had not ended with death. It had changed, it had grown, it had found new life in Serath. As the days passed after the raid, John and Serath became a constant presence to one another. They trained together, sparred together, spoke late into the night about war, about peace, about family. John told her stories of Earth, blue oceans, green forests, cities that glittered under the night sky. In return, Serath told him of Threk's traditions, of ancient battles sung in fire-lit halls, of her brother's childhood mischief that even John had never heard. Slowly, the emptiness inside John began to fill again, not with the same laughter he had lost, but with something steadier, stronger, a bond that was both old and new. One evening, they stood together on the observation deck, stars stretching endlessly before them. The war still raged out there, far from their view, but for the first time John did not feel crushed by it. He felt ready. Carthar's voice still lived in his memory, but it no longer brought only pain. Now it brought strength. "You're still with me, brother," John whispered softly to the stars.